with all what has been happening, a lot of people are wondering, are we still able to go to Canada? Of course, you're still able to go to Canada. Take note, this is not an advertorial for any business or no. This is for you to understand better, to know what to do if you need to do what you need to do. Idowu Ohioze from Edmonton, Alberta. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Okpai, for inviting me again.
Yes, it's a pleasure having you. Now, since the last time we had our session till now, have you had any more changes? Could you update us?
What has happened since the last time we spoke is that the Canadian government has again introduced sort of a reduction in the total number of temporary residence permits that will be issued in the 2025-2026 year. What they have done now is to reduce the total intake by 10%.
Oh, wow.
Again, they've described this as a response to the housing crisis and also the fact that there is a shortage of healthcare professionals that can attend to the number of Canadians who require healthcare services. So, in just briefly, yes, they have reduced the total intake by 10%.
10 more percent, is that very significant?
Yes, definitely. It will be significant given that it was initially reduced sometime this year, but just last week now, they've cut that number again by 10%.
Nido, you see, some of these announcements, if not all of them, have worried a lot of people who would want to migrate to Canada, and so they've been rather panicky, some of them maybe not all. And that's why I thought we should do this. So I'd like to find out from you, are there other pathways people could use legally to come over to Canada?
In terms of the legal pathways, of course, they are just what they are. You have the express entry, which subsumes the federal skill, the federal trade, the Canadian experience class, and the Provincial Nominee program. So that's there, the express entry. It is the quicker route to become a permanent resident because you will land in Canada as a permanent resident. Well, there are other ways that people could consider, although they will be more expensive and of course will be more time consuming. Under the express entry program, for instance, the Canadian government assures that anybody who has been offered a letter to invitation to apply should be able to have their application processed within 6 months. But that's not the case if you are, for instance, applying to come as a student, which is one of the ways you can come to Canada as a student. However, you come and study and complete your studies, and then you get a job in the system depending on which province you are. You would then apply as a provincial nominee. Alberta, for instance, requires that you have a job, full-time employment, and you would have worked for at least 6 months for you to be able to apply as a provincial nominee. So that's one other way. People can also come as visitors to Canada. Although it used to be the case that you could apply for a work permit while you are here as a visitor, that now has changed. And that's one of the changes they introduced sometime just a few weeks ago, which is that visitors to Canada can no longer apply for work permit while they are in Canada. But you can still come as a visitor visa holder. There are also those who come to Canada and seek asylum. In Canada, we call it the Refugee Protection program. So refugees claimants, if you are successful, you then become a protected person, in which case you now apply for permanent residence. There are other less known cases.
Okay, please just hold on a little while before you move on to the next bit. This letter that you talked about under the express entry pathway, where does one get it? What is it about? How does one get to even know where to find such a letter?
When applicants are picked from within the pool, there's a pool of applicants that the government will pick from when you're talking about express entry. So when an applicant is picked from the pool, they are sent a letter, issued a letter called invitation to apply. So basically an indication to that applicant that they have been chosen from the pool, which means that they had met or surpassed the cutoff that may have been set by the government for that particular round of invitation. So that's the letter that I refer to as an ITA, invitation to apply.
Oh, okay. A pool. So how does one get into this pool?
You have to create a profile on the CIC website. CIC is Canadian Immigration Citizenship on website. You create a profile, you upload your documents. There's a lot of there's a process that this entails, and then you write the IELTS, you upload your results. The government regularly carry out rounds of invitation. They'll go into the pool and they set a benchmark. For instance, the last round of invitation that they did, they set 509 as the cutoff. Everybody who scores 509 or above would then be issued an ITA, an invitation to apply. Then they would then apply for permanent resident, and within 6 months of applying, they should have a response of whether they are successful or not.
There is a big deal about age in all of this, right?
In the express entry program, there is an age limit here. Essentially, if you are older than 42, you will score 0 in the points for age. Age attracts the largest share of the points that are available.
So age does matter after all. Age ain't nothing but a number when it comes to these applications. That turned out to be a scam. So the earlier you do it, I think the better for you, because you heard that 42 and above becomes a big challenge when you're planning on migrating to Canada under the express entry pathway. All right, so you were going to tell us about some other cases?
Yes, so there is also the investors class. Obviously, not many of your listeners would qualify for that. The federal government here used to have its own investors class program, but that hasn't been the case now for a number of years. Some of the provinces have investors class program. For example, British Columbia. But for that, you have to have a net worth of at least 500,000 Canadian dollars, and you have to be able to invest at least 300,000 Canadian dollars in the local British Columbia economy. But that's one of the options to becoming a pathway to becoming a permanent resident. Manitoba is another province that has a similar investors class program. I've mentioned the refugee class. Obviously, there's the family class, which is what we call family sponsorship class. If you have a spouse who is in Canada, who is a Canadian or permanent resident, they can then apply to sponsor their family members who are outside the country. So you have to fall within the definition of a family member, in which case you're either a spouse or a dependent child of the Canadian citizen or permanent resident.
There are people who are self-employed and they would like to continue being self-employed even in Canada. Is there something like that for them?
Express entry is not for self-employed people. It's for employees. So the self-employed class really is the one with the investors class, because it supposes that you're an entrepreneur on your own. You have either run a business or yes, you work for yourself essentially, and that would be the investors class. The express entry scheme does not have a pathway that is designed specifically for self-employed people.
All right, thank you so much. But finally, what would be your advice for somebody who's watched us and they're thinking, okay, I'll do this, and just take a leap of faith? What would be your advice to them before they even start the process?
I would advise anyone who is interested in relocating to Canada to pursue that dream. They shouldn't be dissuaded by the fact that there's been a reduction in the number of total intake for the next 3 years. The reality is that the number of intake was never this large before COVID. The government had progressively increased the intake. The reality on ground now dictates that the numbers should be reduced. It does not mean that there will be no admission at all. It just means that there will be fewer people admitted into Canada. So anyone who has the dream to migrate to Canada should pursue that dream. What they should do is make sure that if they are seeking to hire a consultant, that they hire someone who is familiar with the process, who is experienced in processing applications of this type. My advice would be that they seek out that individual and seek consultation. So it will be a process of the person going through the document, the information to then advise them if they are a good fit for the program. Anyone who is 42 or older will not be an ideal candidate for any of the pathways under the Express Entry program, obviously because age is a key factor there. However, that's not the only way to come to Canada. If you are over 42 years old and you really desire to migrate to Canada, you can still apply to come and study. And when you complete your studies here, you then are qualified to apply for permanent resident. Age then no longer becomes a factor.
All right, thank you very much, Idowu Ohioze, for your time. And we're looking forward to having another session with you and maybe pick one or two examples of things one should avoid doing when they eventually get into Canada or anywhere in North America. Thank you so much, Idowu.
Thank you for having me again.
I think you just watched the session with Idowu Ohioze. He joined us from Edmonton, Alberta, and we've been looking at very legal pathways you could take if you want to go to Canada, if you want to migrate to Canada. And you heard that the younger you are, the better for you. If not, the money going to be the goal.